A very warm welcome to this session on the role of CSR in blended finance for climate change in India. I am Aditya Mandloi from the India Climate Collaborative as a part of Earth Exponential team, and I'll be your host today. We are here to explore how CSR funds can be used strategically to drive larger climate outcomes through blended finance or innovative finance models. This session will shed light on successful blended finance framework where CSRs can play a catalytic role in addressing some of the most pressing challenges India faces today in terms of climate change. Just to make you understand the structure of this panel come roundtable, we'll begin with a very short introduction about India Climate Collaborative and the Earth Exponential team. Then we'll dive deep into the blended finance models, discussing its models, archetypes, and presenting an example also on how that can be done on ground. Following that, we'll hear from CSR and corporate experts, legal expert, and also a CSO on how to make happen the blended finance together for CSR projects. We'll then open the floor for discussions for everyone with their comments and questions regarding the blended finance or innovative finance mechanisms in CSR. So again, a warm welcome to everyone. And just to kick off the session, I would like to invite Siddharth Bhatia, lead Earth Exponential at India Climate Collaborative, to give a brief presentation. Siddharth brings over a decade of experience in supporting government agencies in developing and implementing projects funded by multilateral development banks, GCF, and National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change. He has been instrumental in providing training and capacity building to facilitate access to climate finance across various sectors.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think before we can start my presentation, maybe we can have a round of introduction and just maybe your name and your organization's name. Thank you, everyone. And we have Himanko and Parna, and of course, I'm Siddharth from the ICC. Briefly, before we set out, I'll just lay down what we are doing as part of our whole objective and mission. The India Climate Collaborative, its main objective is to move philanthropic capital, and that is what we're doing it through two ways. One is working with individual philanthropists, and the second one is with the corporate philanthropy, CSRs. Therein, the initiative is called Earth Exponential, where I'll just briefly talk through you about the interventions, what we are doing. So, sorry. So the problem, basically, we all know that the capital required overall for financing, for climate finance and climate action is somewhere around 11 lakh crore. This is an estimate by IDR, which is the overall capital required for achieving our NDCs. And then adaptation, which is one of the most important area, adaptation and resilience for the corporates and the CSRs, is somewhere around, I think, 36,000 crore, which is around $5 billion annually, which is again somewhere underestimated, I feel, or maybe, we don't have estimates properly in terms of what is the capital required in that aspect. Then there are civil society organizations, and I think we have few of them sitting with us here. They are doing great work in terms of the communities and the community work, but then how do they actually look at the climate lens? How do they, articulate the climate lens in the right manner, whether the projects are integrated or not, or how do we even, formalize those proposals, climate proposals for the funders is a challenge that they face. And the most important thing is the gap that we identified was that how do they actually communicate the impact through climate indicators. So that was the main kind of set of challenge. And then we have funders who are doing great work again through the CSI initiatives, but to understand the whole length and breadth of this challenge becomes complex, as well as to look at what are some of the impactful solutions, how do you look at those integrated solutions is something that we also sensed when we were talking to a lot of funders. And as you can see through our research, if we look at the vulnerability and we overlay the vulnerability and we overlay the CSR capital that is moved, it's not correlated, it's a little skewed. As you can see, out of, I think in India now, the latest report says that 3 out of 4 districts are vulnerable. But if you look at the capital, it's concentrated in few areas. So that is why, and to give an example, I think Assam, which is one of the most vulnerable states, receives only 2% of the CSR capital. So that was another area that we looked into, and we designed this whole Earth Exponential initiative based on these two things, and plus the sectors. So some of the sectors we see, of course, receive a lot of funding, but then there are intersectional sectors and there are other sectors which also require important funding, which are missed out. So based on this whole problem, which we know, we all know that there is a collective momentum that is gathering, and we know in this room as well, everybody is planning to do good work in climate, but how do we do it and how are these solutions surface is what we are trying to address through Earth Exponential. So, 1 second. It's not working. Yeah. So it's basically, we launched Earth Exponential in July last year, and the idea is to have a platform wherein we co-create, I would say, these projects with the NGO partners, bring the right climate lens with them, and we always say it's a lens. It's not like, we are trying to build a climate project. It's basically the lens that we bring to their interventions, and then help them to also strengthen their MEL, which is the results framework and the indicators. So once that is done, we do like a 3 to 4 months engagement with the CSO partners, and then these projects are uploaded on the platform. Simultaneously, we are also trying to gather intel from funders like you in terms of where the priorities are, how are you looking at the ecosystem, and then we basically try to connect the two. So projects with the funders in the right manner. And we are actually arranged in 5 thematic areas, which is cities, farms, so I'll talk about it later on as well, but quickly to skim through. Cities, farms, nature, resilience, and jobs. So all of these thematic areas are focusing on different aspects, but all the projects that we create are integrated in their approach. And apart from that, we are also doing knowledge sharing and convenings, which is also why we are here today. And plus, I think one important thing is the kind of capital that is needed, and probably we'll talk about it more, but we need now innovative instruments, we now need innovative funding for that, because traditional capital is not sufficing the overall ask. So that is where we come in, and we also try to bring different stakeholders together, whether it is funders, whether it is NGO partners or intermediaries, so that we can have a focused approach towards climate action. So this is what our approach is. We've been, since our launch in July, we've been able to curate 20 projects on the platform, out of which 7 projects have been funded, of a tune of around 18 CR capital has been moved. And we've engaged with more than 200 partners, whether it is funders or NGOs or intermediaries, like I said. So basically how it works is we connect with the funders. They express interest to the projects that we have on the platform, and then we share with them the proposals, the full-fledged proposals, and then of course we have those conversations with the NGO partners. We facilitate those conversations and help the projects to get funded. There are multiple conversations that happen, and then of course the projects are taken up by the funders as per their priorities and thematic areas. So these are some of the solutions. Like I mentioned, we are in 5 thematic areas. Farms focusing on, of course, agriculture-allied activities. Cities basically on urban resilience and urban issues. Jobs focusing on livelihoods, but a major component here is DRE, which is decentralized renewable energy, wherein the focus is now a lot on microgrids, solar microgrids, and the livelihoods based on those. Then, of course, nature, which is focusing on biodiversity conservation and nature-based solutions, and resilience, which is a cross-cutting thematic area, but we also have, say, disaster resilience built in that. So these are the 5 thematic areas. I'll not go into details of these solutions, 20 solutions. We can share the PPT with you. But these are, some of them in terms of the geography and the areas. And these are also on our website, by the way. I just wanted to come to, yeah. So as we plan to expand and scale up, and we would love to also, get better inputs in terms of how the CSRs and funders are looking at it. So we have created a short survey. The QR code is here, and you also have a printout in front of you. Whenever possible, please fill this survey, which also helps us to understand the priorities better, and plus, reached out to you in terms of the solutions that would be suitable for you as well. So that's all from my side. I would then hand over back to Aditya. Thank you so much, and look forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Siddharth, for this comprehensive introduction about India Climate Collaborative and Earth Exponential. Next, we'll move our focus more to blended finance in the context of climate finance in India. This is a critical mechanism that can help bridge the large-scale climate financing gap that Siddharth was also talking about right now by integrating CSR as a catalytic capital. To walk us through the blended finance landscape and its relevance for CSR capital, we have two exceptional speakers. First, we have Ms. Aparna Dua, Director of the Blended Finance Company. Aparna has been instrumental in developing innovative blended finance structures, introducing India's first social impact bond. Her work has catalyzed multi-stakeholder dialogues on CSR fund mobilization for outcome-based financing alongside organizations such as UNDP and USAID. She brings a wealth of experience in impact investing and blended finance. Over to you.
Thanks, Aditya, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I know this is an after-lunch session, so I will try and keep this crisp and hopefully, insightful for all of you. We also have a panel today with us of practitioners in the room. These are, CSR funders as well as, speakers from the non-profit world, Vipulji as well as Reena, who have, are implementing this in practice. Okay, so with that. All right, so I know a lot of you know this, but just so that we're on the same page, when we talk about blended finance, we're essentially looking at capital coming from three providers. Sorry, I know this is probably not visible for some of you, but it's risk capital coming from investors. This is capital that is seeking financial returns. There is capital coming from public funds, so this is government capital, and then there is capital coming from the likes of yourselves as well as foreign foundations, domestic foundations, which have zero financial return expectations, but very high impact return expectations. So what blended finance does, very simply, as the name suggests, is brings these at least two of these three together. So it's a blending of capital, and because there are different risk, return, as well as impact profiles that each of these capital pool bring, we're able to bring these together in a structure. To answer one of the questions there, is this new? Absolutely not. It's been around for many, many years. It's just that over the last decade or so, people have now started realizing that if you need almost that $4 trillion of capital, whether it's for SDG financing, climate financing that Siddharth talked about, where is that money going to come from? Philanthropy is doing its bit, the government is doing its bit, but the private markets also need to get involved. So we need to find a way to make private capital also work for development outcomes. And that's really why over the last decade or so, everyone's been talking about blending as one approach. I will say one more thing. This is not a be-all, end-all. So you can't apply blended finance to everything. There will be certain problems, there will be certain segments of the society that will not be able to get supported by this kind of capital. For that, I mean, philanthropy and government must continue to do what they are doing. But what this does allow is effective use of public as well as philanthropic capital, more efficient use, gives you higher leverage on your capital as well, so that you can use your capital where it's best needed, and rope in risk or return-seeking capital wherever they can come in as well. So there are essentially 4 different archetypes. I'll be sharing examples on 2 of these today. But when we look at it, we have concessional capital. So this is capital that is okay taking slightly lower returns compared to the risk that it is taking. This is in the form of junior debt, junior equity. Then you have guarantee or risk insurance or risk mitigation type of structures as well, where, say, lending to a certain segment has not happened typically in the past because of perceived higher risk. So take, for example, a street cart vendor or a student coming from a low-income household. Banks and NBFCs are not typically lending to them. So in this case, philanthropic capital can step in and say, okay, fine, we will provide a guarantee. But once your market has been created, once you know what the real risk is, then commercial markets should just do their bit. So that's the role that philanthropy can really play here. Results-based financing or outcomes-based financing, impact bonds are probably what everyone is familiar with in the room. It's also been creating a lot of buzz for the last 9 to 10 years in India, with Educate Girls being the first one in the education space. Here the idea is simple, that risk or return-seeking capital is coming in, saying that only if certain social outcomes are met will I get my money back, which means outcome funders only pay once outcomes are met. And these could be social outcomes, these could be environmental outcomes, and we'll talk about one such example here today. And then lastly, technical assistance. This doesn't get talked about enough, but is a very, very critical aspect when you are talking about creating these kind of structures. This could be helping design a structure, it could be helping build capacity of the different parties involved in the overall structure as well. So these are simple grants that are given. It's a technical assistance, but is a very critical aspect when we are talking about a blended finance structure. This is just to give you a quick sense of, globally that, the markets have been moving towards blended finance. They've been recognizing that, this is sort of a growing space. So you have private investors, you see lots of banks over there. Many of you represent the India arms of these banks as well. There are foundations, philanthropies. You see a lot of international names over here. But today in our room, we also have two CSR organizations over here, so Soumya and Garima representing 361, as well as Yes Bank, who've been actually on the forefront of actually participating in a lot of these transactions in India. And then you obviously have public investors, so these are the likes of your ADB, FMO, etc. So lots of excitement. You have, globally almost $250 billion now that has been mobilized in blended finance. When you look at the need, which is in trillions, this is obviously a small number, but it is growing. And in India specifically, it's growing at a rate of about 18 to 19%. So, both banks and BFCs, foundations are all looking at this approach very actively now. So maybe just spend a couple of minutes why are people looking at this? So we've talked about what it is, we've talked about who's doing it. Now the why. Now this is really, really important, right? So when you look at philanthropic donors, what do you really care about? You care about creating impact, you care about that 1 rupee that you're spending in a project should really go, a long way. Right? So what blended finance does is gives you that leverage. It allows you to create impact. And the leverage is coming because you're bringing in other sources of capital as well. And that's exactly what a structure is allowing you to do. Governments, similarly, it allows them to scale up, use their money efficiently as well, and allow for private participation. Now we've had our finance minister as well talk about setting up blended finance funds for agri and other sectors. So people are now starting to talk about it even at the highest level. Implementing partners, we do have some of them in the room as well. Now, why is this important for you? Because this allows you to access sustainable and large pots of money, provided obviously you have the right data mechanisms and process systems in place. And also allows you to diversify your funding pools. And commercial investors, while I know we don't have them in the room, they're essentially looking at this again as a way to diversify, but also basically build their own business pipeline as well, because they're now getting to come into sectors such as climate smart agriculture or say renewables, etc., where so far they've been on the fence to really participate. Okay, so very quickly in India, so while globally we've talked about it, in India, why this is now really, getting traction, we've seen a lot of innovations come out of here. So you have CSR-backed guarantees, we'll talk about that today. We have platforms like Samridh, which was a healthcare-focused blended finance facility that was set up. And here, at the back of $20 to $30 million that came as a grant from USAID as well as a few other philanthropic capital providers, there was actually $300 million, or even actually north of that, about $350 million that was mobilized for the healthcare space. All of this happened during COVID. The facility is still active and growing. So this is just one example of the kind of innovations that are coming out of India. We'll talk about CSR-backed guarantees in just a minute. Domestic capital providers, like I mentioned, are already fairly active. So banks, NBFCs, this is not new for them any longer. And the market in India, as per Convergence, is almost over the last 10 years has been about $14 billion that has been mobilized under, in blended finance structures. All right. So now coming to examples, somebody here had mentioned compliance. So thank you for that. All the structures that I'm going to be showcasing right now and the ones that we'll talk about later during the panel discussions are CSR compliant. So if one has the right will to do this, structures do exist, precedents do exist now, and these have been obviously vetted by legal firms. We have Rahul with us as well from Nishit Desai, who've again been big supporters of blended finance as well as impact investing. And Nishit Bhai himself has been talking to the ministry and stuff to actually work and allow for a lot more regulation to allow for these structures. But even within the current CSR law now, there have been changes that actually allow you to use these structures. So if there's one sort of key takeaway that you walk away with, is to know that there is data and precedents that exist today and you know who to reach out to. I think that's another point that was raised. Who do you get in touch with? You have members from the panel. There are ourselves. There's Rahul and his team who's here. Feel free. There is enough data today that is available. So the first archetype that we'll talk about today is outcomes-based financing. Again, very quickly, there are three key parties involved. You have an implementation organization that actually works with the beneficiaries on the ground. You have a risk investor that provides the working capital to the non-profit or the for-profit implementation partner. Only if the outcomes are met does the outcome funder pay. So let's take one example. So this is currently a live example. This is a Skill India bond. This was a $14 million instrument that came into being about 2 to 3 years ago. What's the problem in skilling today? I think a lot of you may be involved in this space either as funders or implementation partners. We have the government that has launched the PMKVY and other such schemes. There are a lot of training partners that are working with beneficiaries, but those are not really translating into real outcomes of placement and retention. So what the Skill India bond did was actually say, okay, if the incentives tied to a training partner are largely based on training today, I'm going to change that. Training will be still some component of it, but I'm also going to pay the training partner and the risk investor only when outcomes of placement and retention are done. Right? So that was sort of the problem. So the solution was the Skill India bond that was set up. Now all of this is made possible because there is robust monitoring and evaluation that goes into this. So all the training partners that agreed to be part of the SIB had to go through rigorous diligence firstly, make sure they have systems and processes in place. Some of them are actually attending the conference, like Magic Bus, they are here. So would encourage you to speak to them. But also, this was the first impact bond, I guess the largest one. There was also SBI, and IndusInd Bank that had done one CSR-backed outcomes-based bond. But this was another sort of large instrument in the skilling space where you had outcome funders such as HSBC as well as JSW who came and participated as an outcome funder. So this is just one example, and to walk you through how that process really works. So you first have a risk investor who commits, I don't know if you can see this, but I'll just walk you through it. A risk investor commits resources to non-profit or for-profit implementation partners. The service providers actually deliver those interventions, and there is an independent third-party evaluator. This is very critical because there are payments tied to the meeting of certain objectives. So you need to invest in a very strong MEL partner here. So there's a third-party verifier who actually verifies that the outcomes have been made. And only once that happens do the outcome funders pay the risk investors back. So that is, I mean, it looks very simple here. I know behind the scenes there's a lot of structuring that has gone into this, and Rahul can talk about that during the panel. But again, I think with each impact bond, the processes are getting simpler. There are templates being created. Soumya will actually be talking about how she has managed to do this within her foundation, not spending large amounts of time and money actually doing this. So we'll ask her what the secret sauce there is. So here's another example. This is something that we're currently working on in the climate space. This is with Passing Gifts, and Reena and Nawaz are here. So if you have any questions post this session, you can also sort of ask them. But the challenge that we are trying to solve with them is that today, when smallholder farmers are actually trying to adopt climate smart practices, there is often lack of technical know-how. Now, there may be non-profits or other implementation partners that are working with them. But oftentimes, is that effort really resulting in the farmer really switching to CSA practices? I mean, there's a mixed bag of results, right? So through an outcomes-based instrument, we actually want to provide the technical know-how to the nonprofit and tie that to outcomes of farmers actually transitioning to climate-smart agricultural practices, and also then retaining within those practices. So they continue to practice. It's not that they do that in 1 year and then stop practicing that. So over the course of 3 to 5 years, not only will the farmers be supported in transitioning, but there will also be outcome measurement around farmers getting retained within these practices and continuing to show that they're practicing that. Alongside measures such as soil health, etc., will also be accounted for, so that that the farmers actually benefiting from this intervention as well. And this is something that we're currently working on, but again using the same principles of outcomes-based financing. So before we move on to guarantee structures, what are some of the critical aspects that you need to take care of? If you're actually considering an outcomes-based financing, either as a funder or as an implementation partner. The first is, of course, that the outcomes should be well defined, they should be measurable. That's very, very critical to outcomes-based funding. Because financial incentives are actually tied to these outcomes, social outcomes or environmental outcomes actually being met. The second is that there needs to be strong data that is available, either in the form of baseline data, that say a nonprofit has been collecting for some point in time, so that you can set the baseline and say, okay, fine, like only if I were to not do any intervention, then they would anyways, you would continue to see those outcomes. Now, if I'm doing an intervention, I obviously want to see higher outcomes, and hence having the data is critical. Thirdly, there needs to be obviously capacity within the consortium members as well. Sorry. There needs to be capacity of consortium members as well. Yeah, thank you. And then lastly, is the problem really big enough to justify all the cost, time that we are spending on this? Let me just move ahead quickly, and we can also get into more of this when we're talking about it in the panel. I want to show you maybe and talk about one or two other structures, which is a guarantee-backed structure using CSR. Now, I already talked about the skill financing space, again, staying with that same sector, because that's something that is easily understood. Now, there are a lot of students who are getting rejected, who want to take up high-quality training but are not able to access skill loans. So now, in this case, what we are working on is to actually create a guarantee-backed structure where CSR provides guarantees to NBFC partners who then lend to these students. So these students have never gotten access to loans. Their parents don't have the financial wherewithal to actually secure a loan. They don't have the right CIBIL scores. So they've actually never had access to skill financing, and hence are outside the purview of lending or even attaining an aspirational job. So something like a guarantee-backed skill financing program would actually allow these students to get access to financing, get skilled, and then land aspirational jobs. Sorry, the clicker's not, there. So this is, again, I won't get into the depth of it, but this is a CSR compliant structure that we're currently working on. I know there's a lot of arrows on that page, but very simply, CSR is providing a guarantee to NBFCs. NBFCs lend to children coming from low-income backgrounds. They then graduate from these training programs and pay back their loans. Again, compliance, it is CSR compliant, and we have all the checks and balances in place for this. The same fundamental can also be applied in the climate space, since we are talking about climate, where if we are talking about smallholder farmers, or other segments that currently don't have financing or don't have a certain aspect that has been proven out, you can use CSR as a guarantee mechanism. Again, both Garima as well as Soumya have done this to their foundations. So Yes Bank actually worked with salt pan farmers in Gujarat, and Garima will talk about that example. Soumya has done this as well, and Vipulji over here who will be talking after me will also be talking about how he's integrated both results-based financing and other forms of blended finance instruments to actually scale up the use of capital. I'll just end now. I know Aditya is giving me the glares, but just to leave you with this, why should you be looking at blended finance? We're talking about climate today, but it could be applied to any sector. Firstly, you're co-opting private capital, alongside your own money, which is CSR foundations or philanthropy, or alongside government. So you're actually getting a much higher impact leverage. You're bringing a greater focus on outcomes. You're driving efficiency, which is through structures like outcomes-based financing. And then lastly, as I said, maximizing impact leverage for any of the projects that you're working on. Thanks for that, and we'll be happy to take up questions. I know we're out of time now, but thank you.
Thank you, Aparna, for very exhaustively explaining what could be the archetypes and what could be the models that CSRs can take. We had put in some time for question answers after the presentation, but in the interest of time, I think we can have those comments and questions probably later after our panel. So let me just invite Mr. Vipul Gupta, who is the founder and CEO of Earth Focus Foundation, which is deeply committed to empowering forest-dwelling communities and protecting nature through education and sustainable livelihoods. Talking about precedents of what has been done in the space, especially by an NGO, I think Mr. Vipul would be a great person to explain what kind of projects the Earth Focus Foundation is doing. Please.
So Earth Focus was set up with the belief that nature and man can thrive together, and that's just what we do. We build dignified livelihood options, we address climate change issues, soil, water, biodiversity, conflict, and human exploitation. All these are central to our work. We see our work as something that has to be measured and mapped every single moment. That's the only way we think. Basically, we start with what are we trying to solve and how. What are we spending our money and time on, and what is the output of all that? Starting about 3 years back with tribal communities on the fringe of Kanha National Park, we've been able to build a successful climate-resilient, nature-based livelihood program, which is completely outcome-based. We have a short-term, medium-term, long-term income generation plan which we monitor very closely. We measure every single penny that we spend and track it to the actual outcomes or income levels that are being generated. We have a profit and loss statement for every beneficiary that we work with. We ensure complete commitment and buy-in of the beneficiary. We harness and unlock every single government convergence scheme. We have a successful recoverable grant model. We track assets being created, and we work with an intention to build capacity and exit in a given time frame. With 361 Foundation, Soumya and her team, we found a partner who believes in outcomes and not just reports, and together we are building a replicable and scalable model. I strongly believe that blended finance or outcome-based finance is the way to go. This is how we briefly do it. Happy to take questions as we go or later, and if this fascinates you, we can connect even after this session. So I know you guys can't see this very clearly, but so what we do is we pick up barren or degraded land that belongs to the farmers, and we convert that to sustainable land use using a restoration model. Reliance on paddy income is huge in this country. We're taking people away from that to climate resilient income streams, diversified streams. The intervention model is based on agroforestry, climate smart agriculture, horticulture, and assisted natural regeneration. We plant over 26 different native species in the patches of land that we work with these beneficiaries. All of them are of some value to these communities, and as a result, as I just told you, we have a short-term, medium-term, and a long-term outlook towards it. So the farmer starts to get income levels from the second month onwards. It's mapped clearly, then which is we call the short-term, which is like 1 to 2 years, 2 to 4 years is what we call the medium-term, and 5 years hence, and that's the point of exit for us, is the long-term beneficiary plan. It's all done in that fashion. We've been around for just 3 years, starting with 1 acre. We've now grown to about 420 plus acres this year. We've planted more than 160,000 saplings. Our survival rates are at this time 87%. That could easily be the highest in the country. We measure and we map every single tree that we sapling that we plant. 17 water bodies have been constructed or rejuvenated, and interestingly, in just 3 years, 1.5 crores has been unlocked for creation of assets or as income from government conversion schemes for these farmers. Next slide, please. So this is the model, really. I mean, a typical model. We have a fencing created because there's a lot of conflict where we work with the wild animals or even domestic animals. We also use bamboo tree. एक कटंग बांस आता है, different variety. तो उससे 4-5 साल में जब हमारी ये फेंसिंग गिर जाएगी, तब वो वाली फेंसिंग नेचुरल बायो फेंस बन जाएगी. उसके अंदर में we have mixed farmings, we have native oil seeds and millets which we have revived very successfully, I would say. And we've created water bodies, we have horticulture plantations. We don't, अभी हम बहुत छोटे हैं, हम वो मार्केट लिंकेज और ये सब बड़ी बड़ी बातें नहीं कर रहे हैं. हम ये देख रहे हैं कि हमारा जो समुदाय है वो क्या चीज़ को जानता है, क्या वो कर सकता है, क्या वो खुद कंज्यूम करेगा, क्या वो लोकल लैंडस्केप में बेच पाएगा और क्या उसके फार्म गेट पे बिक पाएगा. So for example, mango and bamboo is big with us, and both these things can be sold at the farm gate. You don't need any, market linkages for doing all this. We also plant a lot of native trees which have, biodiversity benefits. They are of medicinal value and other values to the community. So we do that. Climate smart agriculture is a nice fancy word, but basically it's going back to the roots and doing the right things. We work with the farmers. We unlock their traditional knowledge about how they used to live and work earlier, and we marry that with the scientific knowledge that we can get, use technology, and try to ensure that we build a better future for our communities. Next slide, please. So our, the one that we do with 361 Foundation, I'll just quickly, because you can't read it, increase in household income, which is being mapped, high survival rate of saplings, perennial supply of water for irrigation, capacity building of the people who will be taking over this entire work once we exit. This is what is being mapped along with 361 Foundation. That's what they have funded us for. We have a very interesting, funding pattern. 361 Foundation has given us 50%. Roughly 25% is the money that we unlock from government schemes. 10% is what I get on my personal level, and about 17 to 20% is what we target to get from other donors. So it's a collective of sorts. Everyone has got skin in the game here, and that makes this whole thing tick. Yeah, okay. On this particular patch of land that we are working with them, we've got 70 acres under restoration, 22,000 saplings have been planted, 3 water bodies have been done, 2 more are being done, 1 crore to be unlocked as direct income in the, or asset creation in the next 3 years. But yeah, it's actually much more than that if you look at the incomes that will come out of it. So this is what is happening right now. Increase in the average household income is 70,000 rupees already. Now, it's not that it's all come from the land. A lot of this comes from the government schemes. They are out there. We must go and get them, you know. Survival rate, 70%. I told you a higher number. On 11th of last month, we had 200 rain in one day. A lot of stuff got washed away, which we had just finished planting. But we've got it back, we've replanted, and we're back again. Perennial supply of water, capacity building we've talked about. So yeah, that's about it. So our plans is to grow to...
interrupt for a minute.
Please.
On that slide.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, if his outcomes that he's committed to are not met, we don't write the check. Right? That's the power of results-based funding.
Yes, and that too over a 3-year period.
Yeah. So we are holding the non-profit accountable for, we're transferring risk of performance to them. So what is these committed outcomes, once they are met, the donor writes a check. Right? Sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah, yeah. And this recoverable grant is also a very interesting model that we're using. You know, 361 has given us 11 lakh rupees as recoverable grant. But we are rotating it 2.5 times. We expect to use it for roughly 26 lakhs. पैसा वापस आएगा. And we, हमारे पास पैसा वापस आएगा वो. फार्मर से वो पैसा वापस आएगा. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल गवर्नमेंट बोलती है आप अगर किसान हैं कि हम आपके यहाँ पर वेल बना सकते हैं. वेल बनाने के लिए गवर्नमेंट उसको 1 लाख रुपए देती है. I'm keeping the figure simple for everyone's understanding. लेकिन 50,000 रुपये पहले फार्मर को डालने पड़ते हैं, वो उसके पास नहीं है. तो अर्थ फोकस 50,000 रुपये उस फार्मर को देती है और वो हमारे बुक्स ऑफ अकाउंट के अंदर में एंटर होता है. नॉट दैट एन एग्रीमेंट इज साइंड विद एवरी फार्मर, इट्स अ मैटर ऑफ ट्रस्ट ऑल्सो. या डन. तो वो 50,000 रुपये जब उसको सरकार से वो 1 लाख रुपए मिलते हैं, वो 50,000 हमको वापस लाता है, फिर हम वो 50,000 को दूसरे फार्मर को दे पाते हैं. सो दैट्स अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग पार्ट ऑफ दिस होल थिंग ऑल्सो. So yeah, happy to take on any questions later on or otherwise connect later. Thank you.
I just want to understand where is CSR here?
That 50% is the CSR
Which 50%?
from 361 Foundation.
So in terms of, you know, the fund transferred,
I don't understand the
CSR.
sorry, just let me talk. I don't understand fund from foundation is the CSR. What is corporate doing here? This is we are funded by the we are the 2% CSR of 361. Okay, so 361 is your CSR. Okay.
the investor.
Sorry, can I just...
2% profits of 361. But then you said you'll give them only once they complete the project. Yeah. So how do you plan your annual spend?
This is interesting.
I would like to interrupt. Sorry, I'm sorry. We are running out of time. Can we just have the panel first and then maybe we can have those queries? Please. Sure. So that's what the panel will focus now.
We understand that. We are keen on understanding how CSR can.
That's what I think. I think in the panel we'll try to answer some of those queries. Probably I think I'll hand it over to you, Aparna, directly. In the interest of time, please take it over. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Siddharth. Can I just request the panelists to maybe do 10-second short sort of introductions? I mean, we already know the name and organization, but if I can, is that good enough? Everyone knows everyone. Okay, let's jump right into it. I know we're running short in time and there were a lot of good questions. We will not let you go till you have answers to those.
1 second, Aparna. So when Aparna is just introducing, we have this QR code. So the question that Aparna had asked, that what are the top biggest challenges that you have for implementing these innovative finance mechanism? It's just a very simple multi-choice question. If you can fill it, probably we can then take it later in terms of answering a few questions. Yes, sorry. Over to you.
Thanks, Aditya. So I think let's jump right into it. So we have Soumya and Garima here who represent the CSR community. I have Reena here who's leading a non-profit here in India, and Rahul is sitting there who's from Nishit Desai, who's our legal voice in the room. So some of the questions that you had, but I will also take those on as an example. Soumya, let me start with you. So you've built your entire strategy of CSR, for 361 Foundation around outcomes-based financing. So can you talk a little bit about what prompted you to do that? This is fairly unique within the CSR space, and what were some of the challenges that you had to navigate when you set that up?
Okay, so I'll start off by 2-second introduction. I can't take minutes, but IIFL Wealth and Asset Management is now 361, rebranded. I run the foundation, but think of me today as a CSR. So IIFL Wealth and Asset Management, largest Indian private wealth and advisor, $60 billion of assets under management and 88,000 HNIs and ultra HNIs around the world whose assets we manage and advise on. 361 Foundation that I set up 3 years ago has reimagined traditional grant giving, and as Aparna said, all our programs are outcome-based or blended. So we've pioneered a more catalytic approach, which is CSR compliant, to either rotate capital, unlock capital, or co-fund, but all with a razor-sharp focus on measured outcomes, right? So that's 360. But think of me as CSR capital today. We represent domestic capital. Now, the first question is to what prompted us to do this? So I think as Aparna started off saying, pretty much it's a win-win, right? You're not just increasing the quantum of capital in the development sector to meet outcomes. You're driving efficiency and effectiveness of how that capital is deployed, right? So as a donor, you're reducing risk of writing a check and funding programs that don't work. You're driving an outcome orientation. You're driving more rigor in the sector. So it's a win-win. It was quite, the business case to do it is obviously quite compelling. Two, I would say 361 as a company is very entrepreneurial. And just as they're committed to innovating to maximize financial returns for our clients whose assets we manage, it was very synergistic for the foundation to say we're going to maximize social returns, right? Our brand purpose is also performance plus, so kind of applying that performance plus attitude and approach to the foundation and the CSR portfolio was a no-brainer. And I think, so as a leading BFSI, I think to leverage the concessionality that grants provide and kind of have this as a strategic priority from the very get-go was almost, I would say, synergistic or logical or natural extension. Personally, I spent the first decade of my career with Genpact, GE, and maybe it is that Six Sigma, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with Six Sigma, but I think this concept of driving efficiency and effectiveness in capital, that Six Sigma attitude was part of my DNA. So whether it's philanthropic capital, whether it's investment capital, I think that commitment to driving efficiency and effectiveness of capital, which is the exact words Aparna used, was part of my DNA. But the point I'm trying to make is that unless you personally believe in this, unless you personally believe that this is going to be a more effective way for you to deploy funds, you're not going to be a champion of change, right? So I think that I often look back at the past 20 years. I was 10 years at GE in the US in technology, and the past 20 years in the impact sector, the CSR sector in India. And I think that personal conviction, that personal belief is going to be very important. Because of course there is change management, right? Your board, your internal ecosystem, you're going to have to do some level of change management. You're going to have to start with demystifying it. These are very complicated slides. You don't, this is not, demystifying it, showing them that it's more effective, proving to them
that it's within the CSR laws and statutes, right? But to do that internal change management, I think each one of you has to be a believer. And on that journey, you're not just going to take a bunch of internal stakeholders with you, you're going to have to take nonprofit partners with you as well, right? So that personal conviction, that personal belief, I don't know, I mean, to me, I think that's a huge requirement to drive this. And on that note, I will thank partners like Earth Focus Foundation who've had the passion, the conviction, the courage to embark on this journey with us. Also ICC and TBFC for providing platforms like this to talk about it. So that's in terms of the journey. Because we're short of time, I'll just give you one challenge that we've encountered. That was your second question. And I would say the biggest challenge I've faced in the past 3 years has been and we've done, by the way, 17 transactions over 3 years, all CSR compliant. None of them complicated instruments like this, has been the capability and capacity of your implementing partners, CSO, nonprofits, whatever you call them. And I think we've seen that need in the ecosystem, and hence we've actually, a month from today, we're going to be launching a tech tool, a self-diagnostic tech tool, where nonprofits or social enterprises, for that matter, can assess their readiness for outcomes and self-diagnose how ready they are for outcomes. And it also signposts them to a few self-help resources that can help build capacities. So I'd say the number one challenge has been kind of the pipeline of not just products, but even nonprofits who are able to deliver on the promise of OBF or RBF, as you've called it today, and blended finance. So.
Yeah, thanks, Soumya. Maybe I'm going to come to Reena, since you sort of talked about the non-profit capacity. Now, Reena, HEFA has been in India since mid-50s, and you've been largely grant funded for 70 or odd years. What made you now to kind of look at innovative means of financing? What prompted that change for you? And especially, I mean, given you yourself are in that position, again, you have a global board, you have an India team. How, what were some of the considerations that you had to take into account when you were talking to them, as you are saying that I'm embarking on this journey now?
So, Aparna, HEFA has always been working with the smallholder farmers and looking at how is it that we can unlock their potential, build their resilience, and also have sustainable impact. And this shift to, from a grant model to the blended finance space is not so much so because of the change in funding that is happening, but it is also because the ecosystem is evolving. And what we really felt that this is a necessary change that we need to bring about, because when all the corporates that you're talking about, when we come and interact with you, the questions that are often asked is, what is the return on investment that we are going to take? Because those are the questions that your board asks you. So this is a necessary change that we see that we need to bring if we have to be sustainable, if we have to have a long-term impact. So I would say that we are moving from a grant-based model to a growth-based model, because once we embark on this journey, like my co-panelist, Soumya was also talking about, this is something which is going to last. And so it was not, when we started talking about this internally, people had different myths about this. What is it all about? But our international, organization, our leadership is very clear that if we have to stay long-term, and if we want our change to be sustainable and everlasting, that once we move away, the smallholder farmers are continuing with this. They saw this, and today the discussion is moving towards impact investment. Today it is looking at other forms of, how is it that we can be sustainable. So at HEFA, we feel that if we do this, we'll be leading the transformational journey for rural India, and in fact, this will make us, set us apart in terms of, and get different kind of corporates, partners to join hands. So I would say that it's like we are building a movement where we are just moving away from this grant-based model, and a movement that will be self-sustainable in the long run.
Thanks for that. And then, Garima, maybe I don't want to bring you into the conversation as well. I mean, again, being in a heading a CSR in a foundation for a bank. I mean, Yes Bank has been at the forefront of designing blended finance structures, green bonds, etc. So a lot of innovations, if I can call that, in the financial space. How has that sort of maybe influenced some of the work that the foundation and the CSR is doing? And what are your views? Are you guys looking at innovative finance as a way of funding your program partners?
So thanks. I'll just make a distinction here. The green deposit, green bonds, these are all from a bank perspective, right? Whatever money you raise, you're not giving to CSR. That money is going to be given for green projects, but it has to be recovered, right? So normal banking, lending, recovery, that happens, right? I think why it's also important, and I'm glad Aparna brought it, is that there is an orientation of the bank towards climate, right? So we are also on panels of CDP, and we apply for ratings, right? Now from a CSR lens, I think a lot of us, and you may suddenly feel that we are not really doing it, but I feel most of us here must be doing some form of it, right? Let me give examples. When you work with villagers and you unlock government schemes, right? You remember the Venn diagram that she showed? It's the public fund that you are unlocking, right? When you ask for community contribution, it is a fund that you are unlocking, right? But I think the challenge really happens is that how do you bank with the unbankable? Right? There are government schemes, there are microfinance, right? But still, there has to be a credit history. I mean, the bank will always ask for certain criteria, documentation, right? So many times the communities that we are working with, they don't have proper documentation in place, right? So there can innovative finance and returnable grants or revolving grants, right? Can that really play a role? So I think that's where we are at.
So Yes Bank is, I guess, the second part of the question was, so you guys are looking at such structures then? I know you already did one in
so
Gujarat.
you had given an example of the Agaria community. I will talk about it a little more so that it sort of shows how it's structured. So Agaria community is salt farmers in Little Run of Kutch, right? And Seva works extensively there. So we had partnered with Seva. And Seva Bank, so we did two things. We did reduction in the interest, right? So that the interest rate that communities are paying is lesser. And we did a default guarantee, right? So if there is a default that the community does in repayment of the loan, then there will be a guarantee so that the bank can go ahead and loan, right? Do I have to talk about challenges now?
No. We'll come to that. But Rahul, I think so. When I'm looking at the mentee results over here, I think it'll be if you could sort of weigh in on that. I think this is some of the questions that had come up. How do you deal with? I mean, CSR obviously, as everybody knows, has this requirement that the expenditure needs to be made, or the money needs to be given out during a given financial year. Now, of course, there have been changes to that law which allows you to engage in longer term projects for 3 years as well. So can you talk a little bit about that? And given these changes have happened, why, because you deal with, foundation, for CSR clients, let's just stick to CSR, you deal with CSR, partners a lot. What is sort of the hesitation that you're hearing from them? So if you can talk a little bit about how these structures have been compliant from a CSR lens, what else needs to be done to really, get the message out? I think somebody here in the room had said awareness, I think, which is really, really important. But yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Aparna. So as my, excuse me, as my co-panelists would agree, blended finance structure so far has, in the context of CSR, being very much implemented. From a legal and regulatory standpoint, it has been quite kosher. Uh, for instance, as you cited the example of Skill India Impact Bond. Now, in the context of CSR, uh, it was very much in line with how the compliances had to be met. Now, from a lawyer's standpoint, the first thing that would come to our mind is to ensure that the overall structure, which involves parties at different levels, they are all in compliance or in sync with how the CSR laws envisage monies to be flowing from point A to point B to point C. Of course, there are going to be few transactional aspect as well. For instance, in a typical impact bond model, you have for-profit service providers, you have non-profit service providers, right? Now, when we usually understand CSR, we assume that मैंने चेक काटा, मैंने अगले को पैसे दिए by way of a charity, और वो उसे downstream करेगा by further giving it a charity. That is not entirely a wrong assumption, but to also say that can I use my CSR deployment in a way where I also engage with for-profit service providers and enter into a service arrangement? Now, the moment when I enter into a service arrangement, the payout will go by way of a remittance, right, as a consideration fee, not by way of a pure grant. Now, would that deployment of money be CSR? The answer is yes, right? So I think there are few misnomers that currently are, because maybe of lack of awareness, or probably because a lot of folks like us have not reached out to the larger audience and have told them that, look, these structures or models should also be looked at carefully, and these are very much replicable and scalable on the ground. So from a legal standpoint, I think most of the blended finance structure, or for instance, in particular, the one that Soumya was referring about, most of those are in compliance with CSR. Of course, it would require few tweakings here and there, but by and large, they are. Now, why have folks not generally used this template? I think there is certainly a significant lack of awareness, right? It could also be because of, you know, what we call as muscle memory. Now, CSR regime in itself does not have a lot of historicity. And when I say historicity, I mean institutional historicity. The law has been in place for past 10 years now. So of course, it's a given that for first 5-6 years, foundations or corporate foundations would try figuring out their way to make funds available for philanthropic activities. In initial years, most of them thought कि साहब अपनी foundation set up करो, check काटो, और senior office bearers अपने जो staff है उनको board members बना दो और CSR हो गई. It is only for past few years now that the entire conversation has moved on from pure compliance to strategic engagement with community and stakeholders, and hence when we use the term like blended finance or outcome-based financing or returnable grants, you know, there's a certain indication कि ये ज़्यादा banking या financial specific terminologies use हो रहे हैं, and hence people get a little confused about it.
Hi Rahul, sorry to interrupt,
Yes,
but
yes.
I just need one clarity. Probably, I mean, I just need one clarity. So see, there is a corporate,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
and then there is foundation.
Yes.
So say for example, if corporate is giving 2% of whatever is the calculation,
Right.
that money to foundation, that is CSR,
Right,
okay, that is CSR money. Now, when foundation gives that money to any NGO, do you consider that also as a CSR fund, or it is a grant?
Okay, so when, like, so for example, if for instance,
Correct.
if
That is because the entire, confusion is happening
Fair
because we are using these terms interchangeably. Right? In the case of this, where, I'm not sure, but I think they have just completed the Earth Focus is just completing 3 years. If it would have been pure CSR fund, they wouldn't have been qualified to accept that funding also.
They would have after 3 years. We use all the rules of CSR. What you're saying earlier?
So, Earth Focus has been around for 5 years.
Okay.
This particular project of livelihoods, restoration project, is 3 years.
So that is what I want to understand. You being foundation,
Sorry,
do you have this
can I-
prerequisite that NGO needs to be there in existence for 3 years?
I consider it, see, what you were saying earlier is correct. I could say I'm the NGO for my company.
Correct.
But I choose to be.
But that is your interpretation.
Ma'am,
No, that is not
can I step in,
mandate.
please?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
Just, I think we have panelists here. We have 15 minutes reserved for questions. If I can just request you and others.
I understand, but I just ask because then this interchangeably use of terms are creating confusion. So we are not taking away
We're talking
anything
about
out of it.
CSRs. Everything that we've talked about is fully CSR compliant.
I think Mr. Rahul needs to.
Okay, so let me give you an example. I think I will, first request Soumya to answer that, and then I'll step in with my part of the legal solution to that. But because जो returnable grant की बात कर रहे हैं, I think probably you may want to share a few things, and then I'll step in, of course. But to close the loop on, just to close the thread on that discussion. So let's say, for instance, IIT Bombay. Now, IIT Bombay is a charitable institution. All of us agree on that. IIT Bombay is eligible to receive CSR grants, right? IIT Bombay has an incubation center. Now, under CSR, an incubation center can also be set up as a non-profit. Now, if you are a company and you want to provide money to the incubation center of IIT Bombay, you write a check, you give that money to the incubation center of IIT Bombay. For the purposes of pure 135 compliance, in terms of ticking the box, have you provided CSR funding under 135? The answer is yes, right? Now, there are a few back-end modalities that you also have to look into in terms of where has the money gone, what has been the impact, which is the procedural part of the discussion. Now, once IIT Bombay's incubation center has received that money, in your books, you have done your CSR, but the conversation does not end there, right? Now, this is where the blending part comes and becomes very relevant. Now, what would IIT Bombay's incubation center do with it? One, it could simply use that amount which you have provided them to further downstream by way of sub-grant, which is absolutely permissible, right? And more often than not, most of these incubation centers go down that route. But, and again, bringing in Soumya's, unique work that she does around this space, IIT Bombay, then the incubation center also uses a part of its money to make investments into incubating startups. Now the question is, when you make investments, would that be allowed as permissible CSR? The answer is yes, for the simple reason that the Income Tax Act allows an incubator, which is recognized under the Department of Science and Technology, to receive CSR and at the same time to also make investments, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that there are different ways through which you can.
You are going beyond the contractual liability between the parties.
Correct. If I am talking about IIT Bombay, there are very few contributions which are permissible under Schedule 7. Yes. IIT Bombay being one of them, and these are the institutes of repute. Not every institute or university can get, for that matter, even PM Care Fund or Clean Ganga project, we give funds to them also, but they are permissible. So I think the comparison is.
Look, I think as.
And also you are going beyond the contractual liability of between IIT. They have taken money for a specific purpose. They cannot reinvest in it.
Okay.
No, not really. Right.
Can I? Yeah.
No, hang on. I think.
Guys, Rahul, if I can just step in. I think let's do this. We had a second round of questions, but if the panelists are okay with that, I am going to not go into that, and instead let's just open it up for Q&A. This is a much better discussion and more relevant. But let's start with one example, because I think you'd raised the question, how is this CSR compliant? Soumya, can I bring you into the conversation since you've done these and talk about these structures, please?
So let me try to keep it simple. And actually, to complete what Rahul was saying, and I think Seher is right next to you, what we're going to be doing a few weeks from now, and happy to share with all of you, is actually coming up with a toolkit where all these complicated structures you all saw, we are applying some of the CSR compliant projects we've done against those, with Desai curating how they are compliant. And it's an open source document to send to all of you all. So that's a toolkit I know Sahar and we've been working on. And we're also adding what will change from a program management level if you all do embark on this journey. So that was just an aside. Second aside is every single one of our blended finance projects has a third-party legal opinion. The NGO gets, and I'm happy to share those with you all also, right? Over the 17 transactions if they're blended finance. Now, unfortunately in India, I think CSR is seen like a tax. One way or the other, we're going to have to give them money. So it's, trust me, 99.999% of the people say, let me find the path of least resistance and write a few checks to fund some inputs and get a receipt and be done with it, right? That's a reality. All these innovations, all these complicated structures add a certain level of innovation, yes, but with that innovation comes a little bit extra work, a little bit reimagining. But if you look at it very simply put, very, very, very simply put, when you are an outcome-based funder in a blended finance transaction versus a traditional check, right? Not much is changing. Number one, you are working, it's outside your business, it's the normal course of your business, right? It's not linked to my business, right, at all. You are not ever getting any money back. A returnable grant is never coming back to the funder. The non-profit is revolving it. So there's no return of capital. You are never getting any financial gain or ROI. As a CSR, you're never getting any financial gain, right? So literally, very simply put, it is no, so that's, I'm just saying from a purely compliance point of view, not much has changed in terms of, there is no conflict of interest or there's no financial return, there's no return of capital. Two, it's a long-term project, and unlike input-based check writing, you're measuring outcomes. Long-term projects measuring outcomes, nothing more CSR compliant than that. And number three, all your money is going to a CSR certified, DST certified, CSR certified non-profit. You're getting an ATG, you're getting an FUC. So where's the issue? What changes, just to answer her question, what changes, and sorry, you had your hand up, is the timing of your payout. When I owe Vipulji his check, a smart CSR, I'm only writing my check once he shows me outcomes. There's no issue with compliance. What I do is I time that payout in April. So in case he, or May. So in case he does not meet his targets, I have 3 quarters to redeploy that money somewhere else. Right? So that is the only thing that's changing. Yeah, I Q1. Yeah.
No, but this...
And everything is Schedule 7 aligned. That was my 4th point.
Can we take it one by one,
guys,
please?
can we do this one at a time?
Yeah,
so I'll
Correct.
No, it's
Can we do it one by one?
milestone based, right? Okay. No, okay.
Acha, everyone, can I just request you, please? We'll get to these. I think. Can we just go around? We'll start from you. Yeah.
Yeah, she's actually bringing up
I think there was one question.
Yeah.
Here. Just be loud.
Yeah, in this case, we are actually saying, we understand the ongoing projects, okay? We understand the 3-year project that we're talking about. But in this case, your organization is actually making all the expenses from your pocket.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then after that,
Yes.
you're getting a reimbursement.
Yes.
So when we start the project with an organization that supports this, they bring in some capital, not the entire capital, and they say, okay, now what are the milestones that we are looking at? So first set of milestones with 360 is just 3 months down the line.
You are doing consulting.
No.
Anyway, even CSR money is outcome based. There are tranches. In the first quarter, the money is given to the NGO, and then a part of it is given, and then every 3 months quarterly reviews you get them. By 31st of March, the money, the entire fund has to be utilized. The payments cannot happen in April. Now, just let me add on to it. So here we are developing a structure where the NGO who is strong enough, who has a good corpus money.
No, not necessarily.
Ma'am, can I come in? Sorry.
Not necessarily. No. It's not corpus.
It's not the case. The outcomes-based structure that I talked about, there was a risk investor there.
So who is the risk investor in this transaction?
In this one, there isn't.
In this one, there isn't, because they have the financial strength. In other, not every non-profit has the financial strength, which is why you bring in a risk investor who gives money to the non-profits. There are funds who are doing this today. It's called the SDG Outcomes Fund, for example, which is a $100 million fund, which is providing risk capital to non-profits. So in the Skill India bond, people did not have their own money to run the program, and then you're getting paid later. They got the money upfront from the risk investor so that they could run the program.
Who was the issuer of that bond?
SDG Outcomes Fund is one of them.
UBS Optimus.
Yeah, SIF is an outcome
MSDF,
funder.
They beg it upfront.
UBS Optimus Foundation is a risk investor.
So who is the issuer of that bond?
It's bond is a misnomer.
It's a contract.
Sorry, can we just take this one by one? So in the Skill India bond, MSDF, which is Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, and NSDC have provided this capital to the non-profits. So they have come in as a risk investor. Only once the outcomes have been met, have the outcome funders, which are the CSR organizations I talked about, JSW, HSBC, have they paid the risk investors. This was a CSR compliant structure. That's how you have CSR participating. NSDC and MSDF have provided the risk capital.
So for a transaction to be called blended finance transaction, a risk investor is necessary or not?
No.
It's not necessary. In this case, the non-profits needed the money upfront. They didn't have the financial backing. So they got a risk investor. If you don't need one, like say in the case of Earth Focus Foundation, or you need money, there are other ways. You don't need a risk investor absolutely. It's just the case, a lot of the times non-profits don't have that money. That's why you introduce a risk investor.
And the money risk investor is giving to the non-profit, that is not CSR. So that money is open. That is
So CSR plays the role of an outcome funder, which is what the point Soumya was making, that it's not different than traditional grant writing check, because it's the timing of the payment.
In the case of this Susan Dell Foundation,
Mike,
so did the return of the risk investor increase or decrease depending on the outcomes?
It can.
Yes.
But in that particular case, did it?
In this, it can happen. The bond, Skill India bond is still live. It's in its third year of implementation right now.
You know, and I would urge you all to forget instruments. Blended finance and OBF is not about these complicated charts. If you have to remember two things, OBF or RBF, results-based aid, it is a philosophy or a culture of continued learning and year-on-year improved performance, right? It is an innovative delivery mechanism that delivers superior outcomes. You keep outcomes at the center of what you want to do and build everything around that. It is not about a bond or forget all of that. Similarly, for blended finance, it is not, again, a tool. Blended finance simply means donations don't expect a return. They have a high risk appetite. How can you reimagine how you could use it to get in more money? That is, you again start with the outcome and say, what is the problem I'm trying to solve and what kind of money do I need to solve it? Take away all these instruments would be my idea to you, my suggestion to you all.
If we don't talk about an instrument, the legal structure, it has to be a tripartite agreement at the beginning, right?
We've not done any we have not. We've done 17 transactions with a team of 2. With humble resources, each one CSR compliant, and none of them have been these complicated instruments. In a simple example, like she was saying with Seva, we gave Seva 1 crore as a risk guarantee for the training of rural women. entrepreneurs. Against that 1 crore, they unlocked 10 crores of loans, but to women who they'd previously rejected. They didn't even meet Seva Bank's criteria. How was the utilization? All of you all need an FUC? Seva gave me a FUC at the end of year 1. Schedule 7 compliant, women, nano entrepreneurs, enterprise development, done. I got an ATG, I got an FUC at the end of year 1. Seva Bank used my grant to further unlock 10 crores. That's their innovation. Similarly, in a returnable grant, and this is what Garima was saying, I have given, say, industry, NGO, a donation to train rural women on, say, and give them working capital, RGs or returnable grants or recoverable grants as working capital. I gave my grant, I got an ATG, I got an FUC. What did the FUC say? By March 31st, the first set of women were given working capital help, 15,000 rupees each. They were trained and they started making their banana baskets. Then my involvement is done. How the NGO gets the money back and gives it to the next and pays it forward is the NGO doing the innovation. So guarantee, returnable grant, outcome-based. If you all try to simplify it, it is no different than the vanilla grant CSR you're doing right now, honestly.
I'll just...
Could be. Yeah, that's what I think someone said earlier. This is not, yeah, you said that. Exactly.
If you try to use it outcome-based funding or otherwise, it is already, or outcome impact and output.
Is all, yeah. It's not aligned.
That's the first thing. And the second thing is the revolving grant which you are giving, it is based, returnable grant you are
Revolving, returnable. Yeah, same, interchangeably. They say revolving, we say returnable. It's the same. But that's paid forward. Yeah. That's a 100-year-old concept in India, paid forward. We aren't. We aren't. The donor does not. That's what I'm saying.
All right, we'll take 2 more questions. We need to wrap up soon. So just put your hands up. This has been really great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question, for the blended finance or outcome-based, it's very easy to, not easy, but, relatively, it's easier to showcase the outcomes 1 year or 2 years down the line. So do you have any examples or any organization who supports, climate or conservation-based work? Because that's not, you're not able to see the outcomes in just the next 1 year, 2 years. It's a long process to showcase the outcomes.
No, thank you for that question. So we'll come back. Let me take one last question. Sure.
What kind of ROI does a risk investor get by investing in, for example, a focus fund did have a focus, a fund should not have, I think should not have a focus. What kind of ROIs are we expecting?
So 2 questions. One is what kind of ROIs are there for risk investors? And you're saying that in climate, it's not easy to show outcomes. So how do you go about structuring? Would any of the panelists...
How are those ROIs funded? Does it come through the foundation?
Sure. So who would like to maybe take her question on climate?
You? No, I can say what ROI, I wouldn't say risk investor. I'm saying everyone in this room here is a donor, right? So the ROI for donors, one is amplified impact, exponential impact. And if you ask me in terms of a metric, we're at 6.3x, which means if we have donated 10 crores worth of CSR, I have third-party verified outcomes for 63 crores. By the NGO revolving the grants or rotating the grants or, and unlocking capital. So it's a 6.3x leverage for grants from an outcome funder, which is a donor. Risk investor would be higher, no financial returns. But I think you were going to talk about how many.
Yeah, so there are actually financing companies that have set up that are only looking at SDGs, right? You look at Avishkar Capital, you look at Grameen Capital. These are organizations that have been set up that are saying that we will only do SDG related funding, right? But they are for-profit, so there will definitely be an interest component that they will get back once the outcome funder kicks in, right? So CSR is the outcome funder. 2 things here. sir, just because you're an outcome funder doesn't mean that you're not involved from the start, right? So you have a say, इन्होंने example दिया था skilling का, right? So only if I meet 70% placements, only if I have 60% women, will I give you CSR grant.
So
Yes,
I'm
yes.
just going to request you, since we need to wrap up, so I'll just let the panelists
So,
give their thing.
outcome funding, the moment outcome funding comes, the risk investor will also get the money back with some interest. Okay?
8 to 15% is what we've. Yes.
No. Yes, it comes from foundation की बात नहीं है. Whoever is the outcome funder, right? Whoever is the outcome funder. Yeah.
8 to 15 is what we've seen in India and
Yes.
globally.
To your question, and that's why I said, you know, ki there are capitals that are now working exclusively. I mean, it's a business. So, and to your point, it is a 3-year. It can be a 3-year project. There are milestones, right? That is what we are doing even now. I mean, I don't think that this conversation ki CSR sirf 1 saal ke liye dega is working anymore. Government also recognized, and that's why ongoing project ka concept also came in. Right? And again, I'm saying, when we also, everybody, and I'm sure most of us in this room, either when we are receiving funds or when we are giving funds, they are linked to some outcome. They are linked to tranche payments, right? The whole point is that are you looking at the role that finance plays in these outcomes, okay? आपने SHG बना दिया, that's great. Now that is also a concept actually कि pool in होएगा, then government will give. It's a blended finance model, right? But अगर उस SHG को first year में or within few months they want to set up, say, a masala processing unit, right? Who gives the seed capital? CSR can give seed capital. I can show कि utilize हो गया, मैंने दिया seed capital, वो खड़ा हो गया, utilization certificate, right? But when they start earning and they'll give back, it'll not come back to me as CSR, but it'll go to the NGO, right? Or the implementing partner. Right? And then the implementing partner will set up another pulse unit in a neighboring village. That's why I'm saying ki it's not, blended finance is not so complicated, right? It's, बहुत अंग्रेजी बोला, but basic hai, right? What are you doing to unlock more capital, right? I already said that so many of us who are working, especially in rural areas or with tribals, we make sure that the applicable government schemes, etc., are unlocked, right? Most of us are working like that. Now, that is also an example of blended finance. But are we putting it all together? Are we recognizing that what is it that you are, what is the catalytic impact that you are making through this? That's putting it properly on paper.
Thank you. I think quickly, Reena, if you want to come in just on the outcomes.
Yeah, I'll quickly. So we are at this point in time developing a climate smart result based bronze structure, and we are in talks with a lot of outcome based funders, and there is interest. So there are things that we can look at in terms of soil health. Those are some things. We run the farmer field school model. So our outcome funders are also interested in funding this part of training as well. So sometimes we feel that they don't understand, but I feel that that's a misnomer. And the last thing for Garima, to your point, in all our projects, it is mandatory. We measure leverage resources, and we have 4 buckets of leverage resources. Leverage resource 1, leverage resource 2. One is government schemes, etc., and all our projects are tracked, because that is how we see what is our impact. And our MEL says that for every 1 rupee that we invest, we get 9 times leverage. Because at HAFER, we also have a passing gift model where we develop grassroots philanthropists. So we are talking to all of you, but in our programs, for example, we are working on goat value chain. If we place asset of goat, our programs are designed in such a fashion that the rural women then have to pass on that goat. And that goat is for 10,000 rupees, and I have attended those ceremonies, and it is so touching. So we develop and we are generating grassroots philanthropists. So it's a very unique model. I would like to talk about it, Okay,
I wish we had more time, but thank you. And I'm glad in some sense we kind of let go of the panel, but this was, much more informed discussion, and hopefully a lot of the questions got answered. Maybe just quickly trying to summarize, I think some of the points that came up. Blended finance, forget the jargon, forget all the instruments. It's about raising more capital at the end of the day to do what you're doing, to create impact. It's about measuring that kind of leverage, bringing in efficiency in how you're using your capital. And I think something very important that came up is we need to be champions within our organization. Otherwise, this change is not going to be happening. A lot of us are doing it, but now how do we make that more catalytic? How do we co-opt more resources from the community, government, private sector to actually scale the impact that we're doing? And from a non-profit lens, I think what Reena, you mentioned that stayed with me is really moving from a grant-based to a growth-based journey. I think that kind of stayed on. So let finance be an enabler. I think that's really what we're taking away today. And thank you again for joining and all the questions that you brought.